Hi-fi audio is like whiskey. There's good stuff, there's bad stuff, cheap, expensive, but more or less they're all made to do just about the same thing. You're gonna get different colors, shapes, sizes, and flavors. But the most important thing about all of that is finding the right one for you. And today I'm gonna try and answer whether or not the Buchardt S400 loudspeaker is the right speaker for you. And now that this dramatic introduction is out of the way, we can go on and get with the rest of the standardized review process. This whiskey is not that great, by the way. So I'm never quite sure how to transition between a super dramatic intro to just a purely informative video like this is supposed to be, without it being super awkward. So here's the awkward transition between the dramatic intro and the information in the video. Yeah, okay. So the Buchardt S400s. First of all, I want to send a huge thank you to Buchardt for sending them out for a review. This is my first experience with Buchardt. I haven't heard the S300s, although I would love to. And I was kind of excited because this loudspeaker has been reviewed by tons and tons of people, and just about everybody has nothing but great things to say about it. So it's an honor to be able to take a stab at it. The first thing we're going to be talking about is the build, fit, and finish. On fit and finish, it's fantastic. The quality of material used is great. The actual driver configuration and the look of the driver and the fit and finish and the tolerances of everything is fantastic. The waveguides just look beautiful. The binding posts are easy to access and well made. And it seems like everything was thought about. Like they even found a way to make a relatively square box stand out among other square boxes by actually tilting it slightly backwards. So it's actually at an upward slant. Now the design language, that clean minimalist look, I actually tailored this whole review to kind of copy that in a sense because I just love that super minimalist, only what you need type of approach to the actual design. I wish more companies would follow that. And that's just my opinion. Obviously, you're gonna have different opinions about what you think looks good. Now, regarding what you need to drive these things, these are a 4-ohm speaker and have a sensitivity level of about 88 dB. So not the easiest thing in the world to drive, but certainly not the hardest thing in the world to drive either. And regarding the level of transparency or different sounds from different amplifiers, this speaker is very susceptible to different amplifiers. So you're definitely gonna notice going from one amp to another, and you'll notice as your gear gets better. Now, some afterthoughts on this speaker. I really wish it would have come with some sort of feet. I'm not sure if he ships those regularly, but mine did not come with them. So if you're not putting it on a dedicated stand and you are gonna be putting it on a bookshelf or a desk or wherever, I'd recommend picking up something like this, which are like really soft dome rubber feet from Soundrise. I'll leave a link below. Just sticking that on the bottom will keep it off your desk, reduce the vibrations a little bit, and give you a little bit more isolated sound just from the speaker. Also, and this is not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, just an observation, but it's a pretty lightweight box. It's not very heavy and it's not very thick feeling. It doesn't at all feel cheap. It actually feels quite premium. It's just lighter weight. So I'm not quite sure how that would be helpful to anybody, but it is an observation. And also on the operation of the company, they are a Danish company, and you have to buy them direct from the manufacturer, Buchardt, so you can't purchase them on Amazon or anything else. And they do ship from Denmark, but their shipping is pretty fast. So as far as that portion goes, that's gonna wrap it up. And now to the most important part. How does this speaker sound? So some of the key points to the performance is that this is a very smooth speaker. It's got amazing Soundstage. The bass response, while not crazy over the top, does have a decent amount of kick and great body to it, but also has this level of clarity, which we'll talk about when we talk about bass. And those are gonna be kind of the defining features of the speaker. What it's not good at is being a overly analytical speaker. So if you're somebody who's searching for that really, really crispy, really forward speaker, this isn't gonna be for you. This one's gonna be a little bit more laid back, great soundstage representation, but it's not gonna scream at you. So the first thing I wanna cover is dynamics. Mountains by Hans Zimmer has become kind of a reoccurring dynamics test for both speakers and headphones for me. And the reason why is because it's got this huge dynamic jump. It's not the biggest in the world, but one of the key aspects to this song is that it goes from seeming relatively minimalistic in terms of the soundstage performance. It's not a crazy large scale sound in the beginning, but it is by the time it wraps up. So it's a test for not only dynamic capability of actual volume difference, but it's also a test in terms of kind of the scale dynamic capability, if that makes any sense. So it's able to go from small sounds to big sounds, both in terms of volume and in terms of kind of a auditorily visualizable size. And for that test, to speak plainly, it's the best I've heard in my apartment. And it's able to go from detailed but small sounds to almost this kind of U-shaped wall of just gigantic sound coming at you. But it's also at the same time so pleasing to listen to because it's not blasting you with these overly harsh sounds like that song kind of can for different speakers or different headphones. It's got this really smooth but very broad and big performance. So for that, it was fantastic. Okay, so treble. And I think this is going to be one of the defining features for which people are going to want it and which people are not going to want it. Not extremely forward treble. Now, it's fairly detailed, but sometimes, especially if it's already a kind of, not a very trebly song or something that doesn't have a lot of emphasis on the treble, or perhaps the microphones or just the way it was edited leaves it kind of dry in the treble response, you're sometimes going to have to hunt for those little bitty extra bits of information in the top end. For the mid-range and the bass response, that's not true at all. But for the top end, it does drop off a little bit there, and it could be more analytical. And the speaker does have a fair amount of range where it could get more present in the top end without being kind of overly present there. So it's fairly reduced, and I'm talking about like 15K and above. Now this, of course, just like everything else, could be more specific to my room and may differ in yours. And this was an observation, but it's one of those situations where there's a lot of people who love that top end, but there's also a lot of people who don't want that information, and it's not always pleasing to the ear, especially depending on the type of music that you're listening to. And because of how controversial that area is, I'm not going to make any proclamations here on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, and I'll just leave that up to you to determine if you feel like you really want the extra step in that range, or if you're cool with the smoother performance there. Now, as far as the rest of the treble performance, like I said, you're getting overall smooth performance, but it's not under detailed. In fact, it is quite detailed, and there is a lot of information there. And it is really responsive, fairly dynamic, and it's able to do the separation aspect fairly well. And I think the smooth performance in the treble is one of the key aspects that allows the speaker to be something that I can personally listen to at fairly decent volumes for a very long time. And my ears never really felt fatigued. Even watching loud movies like Interstellar or Dunkirk or Inception, like the sound is just really, really smooth and easygoing. So for now, I think that's going to be it for treble response. I'll have more to say in the imaging and soundstage section. For now, let's go ahead and move on to mid-range and vocal performance, which is pretty good. I think placement is going to be a big factor to which one or which style of delivery you like. This is definitely a speaker where the singer is definitely placed further into the soundstage. So they're backed up a little bit, and it gives you more of that kind of live, you're watching something happen on a stage type of performance. So some people I know love that. Now, regarding the tonality of vocals, that's the real impressive thing here. The soundstage bit, that's great. It's got this awesome level of separation despite being kind of further back. A lot of the times when those vocalists get further back in the soundstage, they tend to be more enveloped by the music rather than having this clear separation. Not with this speaker, that's not the case. It is very well separated despite being kind of further back and never really kind of screaming at you and in your face. Now, for a slight technical breakdown of this, I think it has to do with a little bit of a dip in the upper mid-range, which for certain speakers can end up feeling a little bit hollow, but I never really felt that. I just felt like it wasn't super forward, but it was still full. The tonality was excellent, and we'll get more on that in a second. The vocalist just didn't seem extremely close, which if you're into that more relaxed sound is a great thing. Now, more on that tonality. Tonality is excellent. As far as I can tell, because it's hard to really know what the original sounded like without being there. But the speaker and the vocal performance really provides that sense of honesty for the tonality of the vocals. All these vocalists had their own kind of subtleties, characteristics, and nuances. Everything from, Kaleida to Adele to Sam Smith to Diana Krall to Morgan James. What is her name? Keisha Victoria, I think it is. Kaya Victoria. Actually, let me find out here. Yeah, it's Kaya Victoria. Sorry, I want to make sure I get that right. Kia Victoria. Some of the most impressive vocals for live performances come from her. But the great thing about the speaker is that all of them have this full and complete sound to them, but the similar position characteristics. So it's kind of, the speaker's kind of forcing it into that kind of live stage performance. And I'm sure there's a technical reason for this. There's lots of channels that do measurements. I'm not one of them. But as far as what I'm hearing, I love the vocal differentiation between the different vocalists. Like the way this sounds is almost like each singer has its own set of speakers specifically designed for that singer. But it's not. It's coming out of one pair of bookshelf speakers. So tonality of vocal performance is excellent. When it comes to the acoustic mid-range, because of the soundstaging kind of U-shaped pattern, which we're going to talk about when we talk about soundstaging, there's a decent amount of impact. Sometimes with those really fast and thin hits, like think like the top end of snare drum is going to have like this really quick, but sort of on the brighter end. And then you have kind of the body that's actually developed by the actual drum. That initial hit can sometimes lack a little bit of impact, but then usually is quickly wrapped around by that body feeling from the lower mid-range, which this speaker, I have zero complaints for the lower mid-range. It's, in one word, excellent. The upper mid-range, though, for instruments can sometimes make an acoustic recording that should feel close, not feel as close, and it gets sucked back into that soundstagey feeling. So if you like that soundstagey feeling, that's going to be great. But sometimes, at least with me, I'd like a little bit more presence and forwardness in the initial quick, kind of crispy cracks of those drums. But this speaker has the speed, but it just doesn't have the delivery of forwardness. But I'm kind of nitpicking, and the only reason why I'm nitpicking is because of the price of the speaker. You know, overall performance here, there's nothing bad. This is just one of the only few things that I can really find a nitpick with. So I just wanted to talk about it. Now this, like everything else here, does have a flip side to it. A band like Kodo, who does kind of these live recordings, but they're very far away. So the sound staging is great. It's really sucked back in the recording, not just what the speaker can do, but in the recording. So when it's playing those songs that happen to be far away to begin with, this speaker, that's his bread and butter. I mean, anything that is developed with a decent amount of soundstage, and this can be Welcome to the Machine by Pink Floyd, this can be Kodo, this can be Mahler, this can be the Fighting Urukai from the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. This could be, I mean, you name it. Anything that has a really well-developed soundstage sound in the actual recording, this speaker is going to be able to play just beautifully. All right, enough on mid-range, bass response. So if you saw my first impressions, I talked a little bit how passive radiators sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes can have kind of a bloated sense of lower mid-range, lower upper bass response. That one. They can have a kind of a bloated sense of upper bass. And despite this passive radiator being a big passive radiator, what I was expecting, which was wrong, but what I was expecting was kind of this bump somewhere in between about 80 hertz and about 120 hertz. And I was expecting kind of this bloom to spawn from it, but it didn't. It just passed right over that range without having any sense of unpleasantness or boxiness to the sound. Still detailed as ever, but it went right on down to the kind of upper regions of sub bass. And the bass response was able to keep up with just about everything I played with, including more modern kind of pop music like Billie Eilish, or recently I've been listening to, I'm going to butcher this name, I really apologize, Apache, Copter Boy album. It's from like 2016, so I'm definitely late to the party. But it's a great kind of a EDM or dance music, and this is able to keep up with it just fine. Or like the new Joker soundtrack that I just reviewed, with these deep cello notes. I mean, just the texture of the bass response is so good on this. But one of the defining characteristics of the bass that I actually really loved, it's got this low sense of like deep bass. It's got it. It definitely does. But it's just so clear. I mean, it's like listening to a really well-tuned planar magnetic headphone that has just this incredibly solid bass response, but it doesn't have kind of a leathery, thick characteristic to it. It's got this clear characteristic, this like transparent characteristic, where it just doesn't feel like it's blocking any of the other frequencies or any other sounds. It's present, it's there, it's part of the music, but it's extremely unobstructive. It's not disrupting anything else. Now, despite the size of the passive radiator, if you want to hit like 20 or 30 hertz with the EQ adjustments, you can push this thing quite low and it's able to keep up with that. but it just doesn't quite hit that low. So with just about every bookshelf that I've reviewed, if you're in a medium to large size room, a subwoofer is going to be required to hit the lowest of the lows. All right, and that will lead us into imaging and soundstage. Imaging is good. It is not great, and for the price, I think it could have been a little bit better. For example, the ELAC UB5s, which I just reviewed, I think have better imaging than this does, straight up. I think it has a bit better, more isolated performance. Sound staging blows everything I've heard out of the water. Everything that I've heard here just kills it. It's hard to put in quantifiable terms the level of difference between this speaker and some of the lower end speakers that I've heard. It's quite different. It's, you know, it's kind of one of those things where it's somewhat eye-opening, where you're like, oh, okay, like this is what's possible. Great. Sweet. Glad we got that figured out. And another kind of side benefit to this, and I'm not recommending this, I'm saying if it's your situation, you have to fit this into these circumstances, then it's going to be okay. But the speaker is very friendly for different placements. So if you have to back these up against the wall within like 1 or 2 inches, they still are able to display a decent amount of soundstage despite that. And that's probably partially due to the passive radiator. Maybe it's partially due to the frequency response. I don't know why, but it did do okay there. And so if you're forced into that position, while not ideal, you're going to be probably okay. And you're still going to get really good sound out of this. And it's not as punishing as some other speakers. Also, along the lines of being really versatile, toe in and toe out is, I mean, there's some benefits just depending on your seating position, but it's very friendly for where they're facing, and also distance apart from each other. I've had these things all the way from 4 feet apart to like 15 feet apart, and it was able to kind of evolve the soundstage all the way between those and still have all the strong characteristics that I really enjoyed about the speaker. All right, so I think that's going to wrap it up. For closing statements and my conclusion of this, this is a very expensive speaker. There's no getting around it at $1,700 US. I think shipping is included, and that's pricey. But at the end of the day, I have to kind of ask myself, is the person who's buying this going to be rewarded for their purchase? And the answer to that is somewhat complicated. On one hand, I've tried my best to define what's good about this speaker and what it's not good at. And if you love what I said it's good at, then you're going to be just blown away by this speaker and you're going to be very happy. And I think in those cases, the investment is worth it. And just like every other speaker, not just this one, if you don't like the things that it's good at, or you're looking for something that this is not good at, then, you know, I do have to advise you to go look at a different pair of speakers. If I were to give this speaker like an overall score, I think it's like an 8.5 to a 9 out of 10. Doesn't have perfect technical performance, but it's still, at the end of the day, a highly enjoyable speaker. You know, from everything from the build to the way it displays soundstage, the way it involves and interacts with movies, the kind of U-shaped characteristic of the soundstage where it kind of feels like it's got that wraparound feeling. All those things go into a very nice user experience, and that shouldn't be understated. So I think that's going to wrap it up. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Buchardt, for sending these out for a review. I'd really love to check out you guys' S300s. By the way, wink, wink. Subscribe if you loved the video, like it if you liked the video, and leave a comment below if you have any experience or questions about this, and I will do my best to answer them. And until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off. Hey guys, thanks for making it to the end of this episode, by the way. I know it was a long one. It did take me a lot of time, and I'm very proud of the result, both visually, the information I was given, the product I got to review. This is just a win on all fronts, but it did take a very long time to film, and as I hope you can tell, I put as much effort into it as I possibly could. And what allows me to do that is the Patreon. And the Patreon is $5 a month, basically the price of a cup of coffee at Starbucks nowadays. And you get access to all of my videos early, access to ask me any question you would like, and you get to support a creator that you hopefully enjoy. So I appreciate your consideration, and I hope to see you over there. All right, thanks.